Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane by Henry Farrell. Now, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane was published in 1960, and this book is perhaps most famous for its 1962 adaptation with Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the film adaptation at the end of this review. Now, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is about a former child star named Jane Hudson, who as a child went by the name Baby Jane Hudson, and as a child she was a stage performer in the early part of the 20th century, but as she got older, she kind of fell out of popularity, but her sister Blanche ended up becoming an actress in Hollywood, and her sister ended up becoming one of the most successful actresses in Hollywood during the 1930s. So as the years went by, Jane became overshadowed by her sister's success, and as the years went by, Jane became increasingly more jealous of her sister Blanche, and at the height of Blanche's popularity, there was an accident which left Blanche wheelchair-bound, so ever since then, Jane has had to take care of Blanche. So, the plot of the book is it's set in the year 1959, and both Jane and Blanche are old women now, and they're both living in this house, and for all these years, Jane has had to take care of Blanche, and all these years of living with and taking care of a woman who she's been jealous of pretty much her whole life has really started to drive her insane, and throughout the years, this jealousy that she had of her sister really did turn into pure hatred. So eventually Jane snaps and she starts to torture her sister, at first psychologically, but then physically. It starts out where she brings her her lunch, and it turns out her lunch is a dead bird, and later on I think she puts sand in her food or something, and it eventually gets to a point where Jane doesn't even feed her at all, and actually locks her in her room, and this abuse just gets worse and worse and worse, and throughout the story, Jane is also becoming increasingly more insane, and she's really starting to descend into her own little fantasy world. Now, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is a great book, and if you haven't read this book yet, I highly, highly recommend it. And it's a very creepy book, but it's also a very sad book as well. Now, the book really is a character study on the character of Jane Hudson, who is both a creepy and sympathetic character. And you do feel sorry for Blanche in this story. Blanche very much is the victim here, but at the same time, though, you do feel sorry for Jane as well, even though she is the villain. She's very much a sympathetic villain, and the book does a really good job at showing you the pain that this character is going through, and really showing you what drove this character to become as crazy as she is. You gotta figure, as a child, she was treated like a princess. She was pretty much spoiled as a child, and people were telling her, oh, you're the greatest thing in the world, but as she got older and all the attention went to her sister, she was basically told, yeah, you're nothing. So you definitely see why she is so jealous of her sister. So she is a sympathetic character, but it still doesn't excuse her actions in this book. And throughout the story, Jane is becoming more and more detached from reality, and as I said, she really is descending into her own little fantasy world, which really is the only place where she's really happy. So it is a very heartbreaking story, as well as a very creepy story. And in the book, Jane meets this musician named Edwin, and they start to develop kind of a friendship with each other. And I actually found the whole relationship between Edwin and Jane to be kind of heartbreaking as well, because Jane truly views Edwin as a friend, but you realize that this guy Edwin really doesn't give a shit about her. And one thing I thought was kind of interesting about their relationship is, now in the book you realize that Jane had a really close relationship with her father, and you realize that it was really her father who spoiled her the most, and though it's not said flat out, you could kind of tell that Jane sees something of her father in this character Edwin, even though Edwin is actually like 30 years younger than her, and the character of Edwin is a pretty sleazy character. So yeah, I highly recommend Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It's a great psychological horror story, but also a really sad character study on a woman who's slowly just starting to become more and more insane. But yeah, if you haven't read Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, I highly recommend it. Now, there were actually 2 film adaptations of this book. The most famous adaptation came out in 1962 and starred Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Now, in the 1962 version, Bette Davis, of course, played the character of Jane Hudson, and Joan Crawford played Blanche, and that was a great movie. And in that movie, Bette Davis, she really did nail her role as the character of Jane Hudson, and most people, I think, have probably seen the movie. Like, that really is a case where, even though that movie was based on this book, that movie did become, in a lot of ways, I think, even more famous than the book it was based on. Now, there was also another adaptation of this book in 1991, which I believe was a made-for-TV movie. Now, I never saw the made-for-TV version of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, so I really can't comment too much on that. Now, there was a villain in Batman the Animated Series called Baby Doll, and I noticed a lot of similarities between the character of Baby Doll and the character of Jane Hudson. Now, I haven't found anything that really confirms this, but I would not be surprised if I found out that the character of Baby Doll from Batman the Animated Series was inspired by the character of Jane Hudson from the movie and this book. But yeah, that's my review on Whatever Happened to Baby Jane by Henry Farrell, and bye.